picture's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am, surprisingly, are you sitting down with a book haul? I haven't done a book haul in months. I told you months ago I was going to stop doing book hauls in favor of folding those newly acquired books into my page 112 tags, and I have been enjoying that format, and so have many of you from your comments. But I bought a big duffel bag full of books in Canada last week, and I kind of missed doing a book haul. So I am going to do my usual book haul where I read you the opening paragraph or the opening sentence from several of these books and kind of chat them up and introduce them to you the way I used to. And many of them I will fold into future page 112 tags as well, but I'll leave enough time so that you won't you'll have forgotten all about this video by then. But yeah, I'm kind of excited. I'm very excited to be doing a book haul video for the first time in months. The first small batch are a few books I ordered offline and had sent to my parents in Saskatchewan because Amazon Canada, it's weird. Some books they'll deliver to Japan, others they won't. Plus the shipping's a lot cheaper if I get them when I got them delivered to Canada. So here is one, and I've talked about this novel a couple times. This is one of my favorite Canadian novels by Hugh MacLennan, The Watch That Ends the Night. And this is a lovely McGill University Press softcover edition. It was originally published in 1958. This also has a special place in my reading life in that it was one of the very first adult novels that I read. I read my mom's copy when I was a high school student. Don't remember much about it, and as I've said before, it's set in Montreal in the 1930s. It maybe starts in the 1930s, but goes up into the late 1940s or beyond, because there is the characters, one of their dear friends was presumed dead in a Nazi war camp, but eventually does come back and surprises the heck out of everybody. And I think there was some widows and remarriages that were suddenly very problematic. But I remember loving this novel. It's a tome, 300. No, not. It's not as big as it looks. 365 pages, and I'm looking forward to reading it again. I'll read you the first short page. There are some stories into which the reader should be led gently, and I think this may be one of them. One evening at the beginning of a cold February, the first winter of the Korean War, I left my classroom in the university and made my way along the corridor to the stair. It was 5 o'clock, and the best time of my days that winter was about to begin. I love Montreal on a fine winter night, and I was looking forward to the walk home along Sherbrooke Street with the evening star in the gap at the corner of Guy. Then to a drink before the fire, to dinner, and after dinner to a quiet evening with my wife, a little more work, and a good night's sleep. That evening I was happy. Now I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is George Stewart, and I come from what might be called an old Montreal family. But I also come from an impoverished family, and even now I think of myself as a product not only of Montreal, but also of the Depression, scarred by it like so many of my friends. For this intricate fostering city was a bad place in the Depression. I love how that begins. I have no memory of that from having read it decades ago, but I'm looking forward to rereading it. I mentioned this briefly on my Women in Translation Readathon TBR video. I'll talk about it a little bit more here. Another Canadian classic from Quebec, this from the Quebecois French-speaking side of the literary scene in Canada, Anne Hebert's Kamouraska. And it is set in 19th century rural Quebec about a love triangle. And it was a total cover buy. And I have my dear Litzy friend, who is now a in real life friend, Leah. I will be buddy reading it with her at some point. Here's the opening 2 paragraphs. The summer went by from beginning to end. Unlike other years, Madame Roland didn't leave her home on Rue de Parloir. It was very fair, very warm, but neither Madame Roland nor the children went to the country that summer. Her husband was going to die, and she felt a great calm. He was just slipping away, ever so gently, hardly suffering at all, and with such admirable good taste. And Madame Roland waited, dutiful and above reproach. If she felt a pang in her heart from time to time, it was only that now and again this waiting seemed about to assume distressing proportions. That peaceful sense of being free, ready for anything, that feeling that surged through her down to her very fingertips, couldn't bode any good. Everything seemed bent on taking place as if it would soon be clear, past all the waiting, just what her real expectation meant. Somewhere beyond the death of that man who had been her husband for almost 18 years. But even now, grief was working its protective defenses. She clutched at it, hanging onto it like a railing. Anything was better than that awful calm. Wow, I just want to keep reading, don't you? I have Dane of Dane Reads to thank for this. This is a graphic novel from Saskatchewan. Dust Ship Glory by Elaine Will. I did my Saskatchewan literature recommendation video just before I went to Canada, and Dane put a comment on it to say that I should check this out because he's friends with the graphic novelist Elaine Will, who lives in Saskatchewan. So I ordered it the same day. Within minutes of getting his comment, I ordered it, so there it was waiting for me in Saskatchewan at my parents'. So this graphic novel is set in 1930s Saskatchewan during the Depression, and it's about Finnish, and it's based on a true story. It's based on a true story and also based on a novel by Andreas Schroeder of the same name, Dust Ship Glory. I knew nothing about the true story or the novel. And it's about a Finnish immigrant, Tom Sukainen, living in Saskatchewan, trying to make a go of it in Saskatchewan during the 1930s, which was tough going. My parents, my father's family, my grandparents, that area where I grew up in Saskatchewan was not affected. One of the few areas in Saskatchewan that was not severely affected by the Depression, by the drought. But this poor man, Tom Sukainen, was battling dust storms, droughts, and all of the hardships of life on the prairies that decade, and he dreams of making a steamship which he will use to travel across Canada east to the Atlantic Ocean and back to Finland. And he is ridiculed by his neighbors about this dream, and that's what the graphic novel is about. That's what the novel it was based on is about, and this was a true story. So I can't wait to read this. Thanks, Dane. Next was a wedding present. I got one book as a wedding present from my dear friend Lindy from Litzy, and this is a collection of poetry by her dear friend Laurie McFadden, Walking Through Turquoise. Isn't that a gorgeous cover? Thank you, Lindy. Signed by the poet to me and Kenji, published in 2017. Laurie McFadden is a visual artist and poet living in Edmonton, and I'm going to read you a short poem. I haven't read this yet, I've just skimmed it, but there's a short poem called Fauvist's Top 10 that I'm going to read that I quite like, and it's a numbered list. 1. I want to be your purple scarf. 2. You could draw me into your world. 3. It's not always about the greening. 4. Generally, blue skies are good. 5. Orange has a taste like nothing else. 6. Red is anger, but it is also desire. 7. Crayons can melt and are often consumed by toddlers. 8. Red crayons, like red Smarties, are the best. 9. Here, let me paint you a picture. 10. I have been commissioned to illustrate Romance for Dummies. I love that. So thank you very much, Lindy. I also had a parcel of 3 books that were hand-me-down gifts, but I don't use that in any derogatory way. Gifts from my dear friend Jenny of the Reading Envy podcast that she sent to my parents that she had read and didn't want to keep anymore. And one of them was the book that I read an e-text arc of this, Hanne Orstvik's novel Love, which was first published in English earlier this year, and which I loved in a 5-star way. And now I have a copy of the actual book. And I've talked about it, I've given it a full review, but now I've got my own copy. I'll just read you the opening lines, because I love them. And now that I've read the novel, they're quite harrowing, quite heartbreaking. This is the son. How old is he? He's turning 9 tomorrow in the story, and this is his voice. When I grow old, we'll go away on the train, as far away as we can. We'll look out through the windows at fells and towns and lakes, and talk to people from foreign lands. We'll be together all the time, and forever be on our way. We'll be together all the time. That's really heartbreaking when you know the story. So, Love by Hanne Orstvik. Jenny also sent me Samantha Hunt's fairly new collection of short stories, The Dark Dark. I read and loved Hunt's Mr. Splitfoot. Anything I've seen by any of my friends, they haven't cared for the stories so much, so that's disappointing, but I will give them a try, because like I say, I loved Mr. Splitfoot. And here is the opening paragraph to the first story, which is called The Story of. Well, certainly I love the prose. I like this opening paragraph. In a coffee shop on Dead Elm Street, Norma arranges chicken bones on her plate, making an arrow that points to her stomach, where the chicken now resides. She once saw a picture of a hen in a science book. The hen had been split open down the breast, unzipped like a parka. Inside was a chain of eggs, rubbery as tapioca, small getting smaller until they almost disappeared. Nothing like the basket of fried chicken Norma has just finished eating, but sickening all the same. And I'm really excited about this one, Joshua Whitehead's novel, Johnny Appleseed. And this is a queer indigenous novel from Canada, published in 2018. And I cannot wait to read it, especially now that I've previewed the opening paragraph. Joshua Whitehead is an Oji-Cree Nahiau Two-Spirit Indigiqueer member of Peguis First Nation Treaty 1. And here he is in all his fabulousness. I think actually Jenny talked about this on her camera flip video, if I'm not mistaken. But just listen. Now this is there's some explicit writing about masturbation here, so you might want to pull up closer and get some popcorn. But this is I love the opening paragraph. I figured out that I was gay when I was 8. I liked to stay up late after everyone went to bed and watch Queer as Folk on my Kookums TV. She had a satellite and all the channels. Pirated, of course. At the time, my mum and I were living with my Kokum because my dad had left us. I think he took Loretta Lynn a little too seriously because one day he never did come home after drinking. Queer as Folk was on at midnight. I muted the channel with the subtitles turned on so no one would hear it, and turned down the brightness so the glaring light wouldn't shine underneath their doors like the goddamn poltergeist. I loved QAF. I wanted to be one of those gay men living their fabulous lives in Pittsburgh. I wanted to live in a loft and go to gay bars and dance with cute boys and fool around in glory holes. I wanted to work in a comic shop or a university. I wanted to be sexy and rich. I wanted that. I used to jack off to Brian Kinney's junk and pause on Justin Taylor's bare white ass to finish. To keep my Kokum's brown floral couch clean, I brought my blanket and afterwards wiped myself with a tube sock. I always swallowed my breath and curled my toes tightly to avoid gasping whenever I was about to come. When I finally did, I thought, this must be what beauty feels like. My skin tight and burning. Body wet as mud. I loved that last sentence. When I finally did, I thought, this must be what beauty feels like. My skin tight and burning, body wet as mud. I am really excited about this. Next, this is another gift. This was not a wedding gift from Peg. I'll show you She's changed her channel back to Peg the Book Prize Addict. I think she's going to have a revolving name depending on when the book prize season is at its height. So it's just as of today, maybe yesterday, Peg the Book Prize Addict is back, and knitting and reading on the porch is on the porch. She gave me this book, and this has a fabulous history. Footloose in Tokyo by Jean Pierce, and she got this for me at the Brattle Bookshop when she recently met Steve Donahue. So thank you, Peg. And this is old, which is fascinating, 1970s. So some of it's a curious traveler's guide to the 29 stages of the Yamanote line. So it's like a walking tour of the Yamanote line, and that's the central Tokyo line that I use on I think every day, almost every day I use it. And so Peg, I have looked at this more carefully, and yeah, some of it will be outdated, but that's makes it all the more interesting. So every stop, I forget how many train stations, probably 29 stations, like a loop like this, and there's a walking tour guide for each of those stations. So I'm not going to promise to do every one, but I am going to promise to do at least a few and do a vlog based on what's in this book and comparing and contrasting. So stay tuned for that. And thanks again, Peg. After the wedding, the day after my wedding, the bookish people who were assembled and I went on a bookstore crawl in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So the next batch are books I got at the used bookstore. I also have a vlog about that, which may be launched before or soon after this video goes live. On my Saskatchewan literature video a month ago or whatever that was, I talked about this novel and I found a hardcover copy of it, Max Braithwaite's Why Shoot the Teacher, which I read as a teenager, and it was a little bit adult for me, and maybe this was the first adult novel I read. Published in 1965. And it's about a teacher from Ontario who comes out to the boonies of Saskatchewan. I don't know what the time period is. The dirty 30s, so 1930s, to teach school in a very tiny village. And I remember that there was sex in this book, and I enjoyed it. I don't remember much else about it, but I'm going to reread it. At 25 minutes after 2 on the afternoon of the 3rd of January 1933, I stepped out of a frost-covered CNR passenger car onto the worn wooden platform of Bleak, Saskatchewan. Since then, when I've permitted myself to think of it at all, I've been convinced it was then and there that I began to lose my mind. I also picked up a reading copy of this memoir, Half-Breed by Maria Campbell. This is a Canadian classic, one of the very first books that was widely read about Indigenous Canadian issues. And this is Maria Campbell's memoir. I have never read it. This is a pretty decent reading copy. There's a tiny bit of underlining in it. Otherwise, it's a great reading copy, and it's about her coming of age and living life as a Métis or mixed race Indigenous woman in Canada. And I have never read it. There was it made the news last year because I don't remember if it was Maria Campbell herself or somebody else who first broke the story that the chapter about her brutal rape was left out of the published edition. So I think there's talk about a second version being issued with that harrowing chapter restored. One of the people on that Saskatoon bookstore crawl was Lindy, and she kind of brought this to my attention, said that she really liked it. Actually, I can't remember if it was her. It was either her or my cousin, Mary Jean, but somebody told me I should try this. I'd heard of it, Sarah Binks by Paul Hebert. And this is set in Saskatchewan. Paul Hebert is, sounds French-Canadian, but where did he come from? Well, he was born in Manitoba, so probably there was a lot of French-speaking Canadians in Manitoba as well. And this was originally published, this is a humorous novel, which I don't usually go for. Originally published in 1947, and it is a completely fictional critical biography of the wholly mythical but irrepressible and irresistible Sarah Binks, the sweet songstress of Saskatchewan. And the opening paragraphs or lines don't necessarily stand on their own, so I won't read those to you, but I'm looking forward to giving this a try. I studied this novel for a Western Canadian literature course in the early 1990s and have never forgotten it. So I picked up a reading copy to reread it. Frederick P. Grove, Fruits of the Earth, and it's about homesteading in Manitoba. And it was the first book I read that kind of gave me a really deep sense of what it had been like for my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. On the Mooney side, my great-grandfather came from Ontario to Saskatchewan in the late 19th century to homestead, and a few years later his parents, my great-great-grandparents, Henry and Alice Mooney, came to Saskatchewan. So, and on all four sides of my grandparents, their parents were homesteaders in Saskatchewan. So this was a really vivid and gripping account of what that was like. So here's a rather lengthy excerpt from the opening chapter. When, in the summer of 1900, Abe Spaulding arrived in the village of Morley, in the municipality of Somerville, Manitoba, he had been traveling in the caboose of a freight train containing a car with 4 horses and sundry implements and household goods which belonged to him. He came from the old Spaulding homestead in Brant County, Ontario. He had visited the open prairie a year before, and, after careful investigation, filed a claim on the southwest quarter of Section 5 in the township beginning 4 miles north of Morley. He had had good and valid reasons for choosing that particular location. The neighborhood as such he had fixed on because his twin sister, Mary, who a few years ago had married a doctor by the name of Van Breek, and who, up to 1897, had lived in the county seat, was at present, for somewhat obscure reasons, domiciled in this very village of Morley, where her husband, having sold his practice, was conducting the business of a general merchant. The particular quarter section on which Abe Spaulding had filed seemed, to the casual observer, to offer no advantage over any other that was available. But he had found that, while the water which covered the district in the spring of the year stood for months on other parts, this quarter, and the whole section to which it belonged, as well as the sections north and south of it, dried several weeks in advance of the rest of the prairie. Further, he had been informed that the province was on the point of drawing 2 gigantic ditches through the district, one of them being surveyed to pass exactly along the south line of Section 5. These ditches were not primarily designed to drain a seemingly irreclaimable swamp, but rather to relieve an older settlement farther west, around the town of Torquay. But, while they were not meant to drain the land which he had chosen, he had shrewdly seen that they could not help improving matters. With his mind's eye he looked upon the district from a point in time 20 years later, and he seemed to see a prosperous settlement there. The soil was excellent, and there was no fundamental farming problem except that of drainage. Lastly, he was not the first settler to make the venture. The 2 quarters composing the north half of the section had been taken up a decade ago. The men who owned them, it was true, had not been able to make a success. They had left after having wasted their substance and energy, but not before they had received their patents, which they held on the chance that the land might in time become worth a few dollars per acre. A third settler, a bachelor by name of Hall, was actually in residence on the quarter adjoining Abe's claim to the west. I just love the writing. I remember loving the writing when I studied this novel, and I don't remember much about it, but just it really was immersive in terms of what my ancestors would have experienced homesteading on the prairies. So, Frederick Grove, Fruits of the Earth. Now, Frederick Philip Grove has an amazing life story, and I will talk about it later when I actually get around to reading this book, but his life story, go to Wikipedia if you can't wait to find out, but wow, what a life. Okay, so this video is going on too long. I have many more books to tell you about, so let's stop here and there will be a part 2, okay? Thanks for watching.